Man, Dallas really sounds like two cities glued together. One side is skyscrapers and the other is people selling chaos. And somehow everybody acts shocked like this stuff is hidden. Hidden, but also apparently right there on the street. That part always gets me because it is never really invisible. It is more like everybody learned not to look too hard, which is basically a city policy in a lot of places. Bro, they had somebody saying pimping is legal. Pimping isn't illegal. That's such a wild, confident statement. Like if you say it slowly enough, the law gets confused. But that mindset is real, because people start splitting hairs immediately. The second you create a gray zone, somebody lives in it full time. And then they dress it up like a philosophy. "I'm a baboom pimp" is maybe the funniest sentence ever. That's not a title, that's a warning label. It sounds like a cartoon villain who also does taxes. But the weird part is how much of it is performance. They're selling identity before they're selling anything else. Yeah, the money is there, but the persona is the product. And I think that is what makes it so sticky for people, because it feels like control, even when it's obviously not clean control. I mean, the interviewees keep talking about freedom, but it sounds like pressure. Freedom and coercion can look annoying similar from far away, especially when money is the language everyone already speaks. Dallas just seems aggressively entrepreneurial, even in the worst way. That's the nicest way anybody has ever described criminal behavior. I'm trying to be polite, but yeah, it is entrepreneurship with terrible branding. What freaked me out more was the gun stuff. Bro said he sold to 12-year-olds and 8-year-olds like it was inventory. That's not a side hustle. That's a moral collapse with shipping. And he said it so casually, which is the scariest part. Because once something becomes normal to you, the line disappears. He was basically talking like a guy at a store counter. Except the product is way more likely to destroy somebody's life. And when he says he lives off it, you realize how deep the loop is. Like what comes first, the money or the identity? Usually the identity, then the money keeps feeding it. And then suddenly the person is defending the system that trapped them. Which is the whole tragedy of all this, honestly. The sex work side had that same energy of visibility without protection. Businesses complaining about solicitation near their stores tells you it is out in the open. But then the city probably acts surprised every single time. We had no idea people were walking up to cars on that road. Right. Everybody knew, including the parking lot. Still, I don't want to romanticize it either. A lot of that is desperation getting monetized. And the people making money off it are rarely the most vulnerable ones. That gap is what makes it feel so ugly. Then you get the hitman part, which is just next-level darkness. Asking, "What's the price of a human life?" is already cursed. And the worst part is that somebody answers like it's a business inquiry. That is where the documentary stops feeling like a documentary. It starts feeling like you're watching people negotiate reality, or negotiate their own consequences out loud. That's the thing, though. The camera doesn't create the darkness. It just makes you sit in it longer than you'd like. And then the title is like, Sex, Money, and Murder, just casually. Real subtle, very gentle journalism. I mean, it is clickbait, but it is also accurate. Accuracy is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. What I kept thinking was how many of these guys talk like they're untouchable. And maybe for a while they are. That's the danger of open criminal economies. They teach people arrogance. Then one arrest, one betrayal, and the whole thing folds. That's why the swagger always sounds a little borrowed to me. Borrowed swagger is a perfect phrase. Put that on a t-shirt and never explain it. The guy talking about working 9 to 5 being impossible was interesting too. Because that is not just laziness, It's a whole rejection of structure. But also, sometimes structure rejects people first. That is the uncomfortable truth people skip over. Not every bad choice starts from a free and stable life. Still, once you're selling guns to kids, I run out of sympathy fast. Same. Sympathy leaves the chat at that point. Leaves the group chat, blocks the number, changes cities. But I do think the documentary is exposing a market, not just villains. Markets need buyers, not just bad guys with stories. That is the more disturbing part, honestly. Because somewhere there is always demand. Always. And once demand exists, somebody will package the supply. That's why cities never fully solve this by just pretending it's not there. You need enforcement, yes, but also exit ramps. Otherwise, you're just mowing grass in a swamp. That's a brutal metaphor, but it's right. Yeah, because the same people keep coming back in different forms, and the city keeps pretending it is a surprise each time. Dallas has that polished money look, so the mess stands out even harder. Maybe that is why the contrast feels so violent. The clean skyline and the dirty undercurrent are literally next to each other. That visual does a lot of the moral work for the documentary. All the suits upstairs, all the madness downstairs. That is basically the whole movie right there. And then you realize the line between those worlds is thinner than people think. Money moves through both, just with different uniforms. That's the part that lingers with me. Same city, totally different morality depending on the block. Man, that is depressing as hell. Yeah, but it is honest. And honesty is probably the only thing this kind of story has going for it. That and a bunch of people saying insane things on camera, which, to be fair, is excellent television. Terrible civic outcome, great footage. Exactly. And that contradiction is why people keep watching. You want the spectacle, but you also want to understand the system. And maybe to convince yourself your city is not that different. Which is usually the most uncomfortable reason of all. But the wild part is how normal they make it sound. Like it's just another business model with extra risk. That is what gets under your skin, honestly. One guy's talking about guns like inventory, not violence. Yeah, like he's pricing sneakers, not weapons. And then the hitman claim comes in like a casual add-on. Also, if you need somebody handled, call me. That's the part where your stomach just drops. I don't even know how much of that you believe. You think half of it is performance? Half is performance, half is self-mythology, and a little is true. That is the most dangerous cocktail imaginable. Because once people start believing their own legend, it's over. Especially when the legend is built on fear. And the scary thing is, the camera doesn't make them less real. If anything, it makes the whole thing feel closer. Right, because now it's not an abstract crime story. It's a guy in a car talking like he's your neighborhood landlord. A very illegal landlord, but yes. And that's why the sex work part hits differently too. Because it's not hidden in some fantasy alleyway. It's by businesses, by roads, by places people drive past every day. So everyone acts shocked, but everybody kind of knows. The city does that thing where it pretends not to see. And the people in it learn to survive by being visible in the right way. Or invisible when it matters. That line about selling guns to kids was insane. Like, unbelievably cold. He said it like he was talking about selling chips. That kind of moral numbness is the real horror. Do you think it's numbness or just survival? Because some people say outrageous stuff to look tough. Sure, but even the exaggeration tells you the culture. Nobody casually jokes their way into a good neighborhood, unless the neighborhood is built on bad decisions. What fascinates me is the economic logic of it. People keep saying it's just about vice, but it's really labor. Labor with coercion, risk, and almost no protection. Which is a brutal way to make a living, obviously. And then somebody always shows up and calls it empowerment. That's when I start reaching for the remote. The remote and my basic human instinct. Because choice matters, but so does pressure. A lot of these people are describing coercion without using the word. Yeah, and that silence is doing a lot of work. You hear them talk about money, but not the fear underneath. And the money part is always the lure, right? Like once cash starts moving, everybody gets quiet. Money has an amazing PR team, best propaganda machine ever built. But it also explains why these markets persist. If someone can make rent in one night, the math gets ugly, especially when the legal options feel humiliating or impossible. That's the part people skip when they moralize. They skip the part where systems fail first. Exactly. And then the underground becomes an alternative economy. A nasty one, but still an economy. With branding, customer service, and insane margins. Customer service is a horrifying phrase there, but that's why the documentary style works so well. It doesn't sanitize anything, it just lets them self-incriminate, which is either brilliant filmmaking or complete madness. Possibly both, which is usually the best art. That's a very generous way to describe a reckless assignment. I kept thinking about the line, "every hood in Dallas." That kind of blanket statement is obviously exaggerated, but exaggeration often points at something real. A concentrated culture, a visible street economy, a lot of young guys chasing status. And no one wants to admit status is a drug too. A very expensive one with terrible side effects. Like, why else would someone brag on camera about all that? Because the brag itself is the product? Yeah, the image is part of the business. Respect, intimidation, desire, all bundled together. Basically a terrible startup pitch. Founder mode, but for chaos. And then there is the weird contradiction of being a good guy. Everybody in these worlds says that eventually. Do they believe it, though? I think some of them need to believe it to function. Otherwise, the whole thing becomes unbearable. That's actually the scariest part to me. Not the violence, but the self-justification. Because once someone feels morally settled, they stop checking themselves. And then the wreckage just keeps stacking up. It's such a bleak kind of confidence. You almost admire the nerve for 2 seconds, then hate yourself for it. Yeah, that is the trap of watching this stuff. You're forced to confront how seductive power looks from far away, and how fast that seduction rots up close. Power is sexy until it starts explaining itself. That should be on a mug, honestly. Still, I get why people watch this and can't look away. It shows the city as a living machine, not a postcard. With pressure, hunger, vanity, and violence all in the same room. And everybody pretending they are just passing through. The oldest lie in any dangerous business. That's probably why it feels so Dallas and so universal at once. Yeah, the names change, the hustle doesn't. Unfortunately, the human condition remains undefeated. And that's a depressing place to land. But maybe the honest one. What hit me was how casually everybody said it out loud. Like the illegal part was just a technicality. Yeah, pimpin' ain't illegal, as if that settles the whole moral question. That line is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's the kind of sentence people use when they want a shield. Right, because the camera keeps asking, and they keep reframing it as business. Business with trauma, obviously, which is the darkest kind. And everybody in that world seems weirdly proud of being untouchable. The gun seller saying he'd sell to a kid was insane to hear. That's not just depravity, that's complete collapse of any boundary. And then the documentary just sits there and lets him keep talking. That's the wild part. It doesn't even need narration to look evil. The quote does the work for you. But I also think that's the danger of this whole thing. What part? The access or the normalization? Both. Because once you make violence sound like a side hustle, people adapt. And Dallas already has the ingredients for adaptation. Money pressure, neighborhood pressure, ego pressure, all of it. Basically a terrible startup ecosystem. Except the product is destruction. The pimp interviews were the strangest to me, honestly. Because they were selling a lifestyle as if it were a philosophy. Exactly. Like they'd found some alpha code to life. I'm on my time. Yeah, that part is seductive in a terrible way. People hear freedom before they hear exploitation. And that's where the trap starts. Because the sales pitch is always autonomy first. Then the exit costs become impossible. Especially when money is immediate and dignity is abstract. That sentence should be illegal by itself. It's absurd how clean the logic sounds when it's rotten. And that's how a lot of people get pulled in. Not by ideology, just by one good week. Or one bad month. Yeah, one eviction, one medical bill, one broken relationship. The usual doorways are always financial first. Then the whole thing gets wrapped in masculine theater. The outfits, the talk, the swagger, the stand-on-business energy. Which is hilarious until you remember nobody's standing on anything solid. They're standing on instability and calling it power. Did you notice how often they talked about respect? Yeah, because respect is the currency when trust is gone. And in these markets, respect usually means fear. Which is such a depressing upgrade from manners. Imagine building your whole identity around being feared by strangers. Yet people do it because it works, at least for a while. That "for a while" is the part everyone skips. Because the camera catches the swagger, not the fallout. And the fallout is probably the real story. The arrests, the overdoses, the kids who grow up around it. The inheritance nobody puts on a business card. That was the heaviest part for me. Which part, the kids or the normalization? The fact that violence becomes background noise. Once that happens, everything else gets easier to excuse. Next thing you know, somebody's calling a murder arrangement a service. That part was horrifying because it was presented so casually. Not theatrical, not comic book evil, just customer service energy. That's the sickest possible tone for a conversation about killing. It makes you realize how language can anesthetize everything. Exactly. If you rename it enough, people stop flinching. And then the moral center moves without anyone noticing. I keep thinking about the city in the background, too. The glass buildings, the corporate money, then this underneath. Dallas basically has a side quest economy running in parallel. Except the side quest is armed. That contrast is why these documentaries hit so hard. Because the city isn't just one thing. It's the sum of denial and demand. Everyone likes the skyline and ignores the shadows it throws. And the people inside the shadows are often just trying to eat. Yeah, which doesn't excuse it, but it explains the pipeline. Explanation is not forgiveness. Spicy little truth there. Because people love acting like those are the same thing. I also thought the documentary was almost too fascinated by the characters. Like it wanted to condemn them and admire them at the same time. That tension is exactly what makes it uncomfortable. Because if you only judge, you miss how the system works. And if you only humanize, you accidentally glamorize. Documentary ethics are messy like that. Welcome to the world's ugliest balancing act. The weirdest thing is how much of it is just marketing. Not just sex or guns, but identity itself. Selling danger as confidence is a hell of a brand strategy. Terrible for society, excellent for a logo. And somehow people buy into it because it feels raw. Raw often just means unfiltered enough to be seductive, which is why it spreads so fast online, too. Everybody wants access to the forbidden without the consequences. That is basically the entire internet in one sentence. The scary part is when that appetite meets real streets. Then somebody gets hurt for something they saw as content, and somebody else gets buried for it. Yeah, that lands. It also makes me wonder how many people around them are just pretending not to know. Probably a lot, because ignorance is cheaper than courage. That should be embroidered on every City Hall pillow. Honestly, yes, because the silence is never accidental. The businesses complaining about solicitation are seeing one layer of the same machine. Right, they want the symptom gone, not the conditions changed. That's the recurring joke of urban life. Everyone hates the mess after enjoying the system. So where do you even draw the line with telling stories like this? I think you draw it at making cruelty look aspirational. Everything else is just uncomfortable truth. That's annoyingly fair. But the truth still needs a lot of care because it can punch down fast. Especially when the people on camera are already trapped in a bad ecosystem. Yeah. Poverty plus ego plus access to weapons is a brutal mix. And then add fame, even fake fame, and it gets uglier. Fake fame is still fame if enough people are watching. That might be the most depressing sentence in the whole episode. Probably, but it's also probably true. Truth and disgust often travel together. And maybe that's why the episode sticks with you. Because it doesn't let you pretend the line is clear. Yeah, the line is blurrier than people want it to be. Which is inconvenient for morality and great for criminals. Perfect place to leave everybody uncomfortable.